Hello, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Canton.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And this week we're going to be talking about how and when to revise a book. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup. And Dave, you can go first.
Right. Another episode of Seven Stones, written, polished, published. So I've been working on how exactly to wrap that up, because there's a massive amount of plot in the world, but I've just hit 96 episodes, so it's coming up on the 100. So it seems about a good time to wrap it up, or at least take a break from the world, given that it's now, they've fixed the problem that started the story arc off almost. So it's going to be a good natural series break point, as it were, and also about the size of a novel, if I put it all together now, a substantial fantasy novel. So I've been working on how to put in a big break point as opposed to a small between little parts break point, without leaving all the readers going, we hate you, you have to tell us what happens next. I've been doing revisions on adventure, which is where tonight's topic came from, and I've been starting to muse on what to do once I have wrapped up Seven Stones for a bit. So that's me for the week.
Cool. While you've been working on adventure, I've been working on Sorcery. So I wrote 2 chapters this week, the first chapter and the third chapter. So I think we mentioned that the beta reading turned up that the beginning wasn't that great in Sorcery. So we came up with a new beginning, and I wrote that this week. So there's another kind of through line thread we came up with that I need to work on, and that'll be next week. Other than that, I culled quite a substantial chunk of my list, because I noticed that I had 1,150 readers or something following me on my mailing list, and out of those, about 250 or 300 hadn't opened an email in 6 months. So I sent them an email saying, hey, do you want to keep following me because you haven't opened an email in a while? And about 20-25 people said, yes, please keep me on your list. Like, I put a link, said just click here if you want to stay on the list. So I managed to get rid of about 250 or so, which then takes me under, it might actually have been closer to 300. It takes me under 1,000, which is, if you're on MailChimp, that's cheaper by about $5 a month. So for readers who weren't going to open the emails anyway, that's pretty good. And I also came up with a new idea for the app, which is not helpful when I want to get back to writing. But but the problem is, it's because I'm going back to writing that I'm thinking. So I've been watching Westworld, and I've been watching The Expanse, which is based on S.A. Corey's series. And both series are ones where there's a lot of different points of view, different motivations, and it's a very kind of tangled web of plots. And I was thinking about, well, I'd love to write something like that, where, you know, there's twists where the readers go, oh, holy crap, I didn't expect that was going to happen. And all the characters are interacting in very complicated ways and stuff, like Game of Thrones as well. But I thought, well, that's a lot to hold in your head at the same time. Like, obviously, it probably takes them a long time to work out how everything's going to interact. So then I thought, well, is there a simpler way to represent that? And I thought, essentially what you have is a lot of different threads going through the book. So each character has their own kind of motivation thread, and you've got the plot thread, and maybe the world at large thread, and all these different things, and they're all happening. And it's, you know, if you've got a really complicated book like Westworld or The Expanse, you've maybe got 100 or 150 threads going on at the same time. So it's no wonder it's difficult to kind of, that George R. R. Martin takes 7 years to write a book or whatever. So I thought maybe I could come up with a piece of software that would simplify that you could actually manage the threads and tell you how they're interacting and that kind of stuff. Or at least try and come up with some way of simplifying it. Even, it may not be put it in the app, it may be put it in Excel or something. I'm not sure yet. But that's kind of what I've been thinking about. Like the self-publishing podcast guys were talking about that last week, about how it's important to not just be rush all the time, but actually sit still and think about something without having to make a decision immediately. So yeah, I'd love to come up with a way to, even if it's drawing it on paper, come up with a way to plan out a book so that it's a bit more complicated than hero against villain, hero wins and the villain loses, and that's kind of the story. Obviously that can happen because that's generally the most satisfying stories, that's the way they happen, but there should be more stuff going on besides. So that's my week. A lot of thinking and writing 2 chapters. So yeah, we'll get on to our topic. Since both of us are working on revisions, it's kind of a good topic to start with. Why don't you go first, Dave?
Right. First, and possibly the most important thing is, if you decide to revise, there will be a revision that you need to make just after you've finalized things. So in my case, I just uploaded the revised manuscript to CreateSpace, which, as everyone who's gone through CreateSpace knows, means the book is like off the shelf for a while they go through all the reviews. And so it's something you don't want to do over and over again for tiny things. And an hour after I submitted it for review, got an email from someone going, hey, here's something that didn't quite make sense to me. So I'd sat there and waited for a while just to make sure, just to see if anything else clicked in my head. Nothing came up. Everything was finished. Everything's tidy. Everything's good. Upload it. Get to the point where I can't make a change. And bunk. You might want to consider changing this. So the takeaway from that is that you shouldn't get too focused on having absolutely everything finished. If you want to do your revisions and then send it out to beta readers, or do your revisions and then publish, take a short period to wait, just so you don't get that, okay, I went right the way through the manuscript and slipped it up straight away, and then think to yourself, oh, I forgot to incorporate that change that I was going to make. So give yourself a bit of breathing time, maybe a day, but don't sit there waiting forever, because if someone's going to send you a change, someone's going to suggest a change just after the point where you've locked everything down anyway. So you might as well get rid of that thing. Which is actually what inspired this topic in me, because obviously with something like KDP, you could make changes several times a week if you wanted to. Just tweak the Mobi, upload a new one. But it's sort of working out how often it's actually sensible to do it that can be a bit of a niggle.
Yeah, I mean, what you don't want is what games publishers do a lot these days, where they have the day one patch. Like, yeah, essentially they release something that's broken and then they have to release a patch to fix it the first day. Especially the KDP guys, from what I've heard, will not revise your. Obviously, the people who've already bought it don't get it unless there's a major revision, and even major revisions. Someone was mentioning that they had 100 and something changes in their book, and that wasn't enough. Like they said, no, that's not a major revision. I managed to get a major revision on The Bite on the Line, but I had written 4 extra chapters or something. So that was a pretty major revision. Anything less than that, if it's just like, oh, I tweaked a few sentences, they won't bother. So anyone who's bought it on day one gets a crappy version, and they never get the updated version. No matter it, they could download it in a year's time, and they still get a crappy old version. However, I totally get what you're saying. You don't want it to freeze you to be constantly looking for perfection, because that's not going to happen. There's errors in classic books. I'm pretty sure I've read books where the character's called the wrong thing, or they put their sword down twice, or whatever it happens to be. And I think most readers will generally forgive some errors. Maybe if your work is rife with errors, then that's not great. You should have gotten an editor or more beta readers or something. So yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is revision, where you get better. So you do a revision a year later, 2 years later, whatever it happens to be. So you can revise a day later because you just found a little niggle. Or as I did with The Bite on the Line, you revise where you change massive amounts of things around because some things didn't flow correctly, but you wouldn't have seen that at the time. Yeah, I think there's an inclination, I think, for all of us to, as humans, to want things to be done, to like kind of put a wax seal on it and say, okay, that is done. I don't have to think about that anymore. That task is over. And I think the problem with creativity is that it can never, it's not necessarily ever over. And there is a danger of doing a George Lucas and ruining something by continually messing with it until you've completely destroyed what was good about it in the first place. So, yeah. Did you have any more thoughts on that, Dave?
Nope. Sorry, no, it's just a dry throat moment, just as you went. You also had Dave. I can't speak. No. Yeah, I think there are two kinds of revisions here, definitely, as you say, the ones that make the book better structurally, and the ones that are errors in grammar, spelling, typos, whatever. I think they're different things. So fixing a spelling error is never going to cause you an issue. No one's going to complain that your book is too well spelled, or all of the commas are in the right places. They were expecting there to be a certain level of mistakes. But on the other hand, people are going to forgive that, a certain density of those. So they might notice, but it's not one misplaced comma, one misspelt word isn't going to lose you very much. But structural problems, readers don't notice so much usually, but do have that unconscious, it wasn't really utterly satisfying. So thinking about all of the times I've recommended a book to someone or not recommended a book to someone, I can't remember ever having said, oh, you have to read this book. The plot's kind of okay, but their use of semicolons is amazing. And I'm right at the very end of the bell curve on semicolons, and I love semicolons compared to the average person. And I don't recommend a book that has good use of semicolons unless it's got that soft structure to it as well. Whereas I've recommended stories to people where they aren't, but I know that the spelling isn't perfect, that there are odd commas in places. So I think when it comes to making revisions, there are two things that you want to do. Fixing the problems that are there, which are the things that are probably really going to niggle at you, that you'll spot. That you upload it, and immediately after you upload a manuscript, you'll have some reason to glance through it, like you want to check the page number that a particular scene has on it. You'll find it in the manuscript, and then, boom, there's a comma in the wrong place. You think, oh, drat. And at that point, you want to fix that immediately, but you need the mindset that it doesn't make, it's not good business to fix that comma necessarily. You should save up a volume of commas and spelling mistakes. What exactly that volume is, at the point it becomes good to do a revised edition just for spelling and commas and so on, I don't know yet. I'm still working on that because I still want to fix them all, and I'm stopping myself.
It depends. Like, I think, so fixing the ebook version, because it's just a button click, it depends. When you do your stuff, Dave, you're formatting it differently, but I'm just clicking compile on Scrivener and then uploading it. So potentially it's half an hour's work for me or something. Which is another thing where I've noticed that I had my books up on Noise Trade and other different places, and I've whittled that down again, because if I want to do revisions, that half an hour is now an hour and a half, because I've got all these different crappy things I have to do, all the different sites for no sales, where there's no sales coming off them. So the other thing, so we've discussed at length, like Amazon having to be exclusive for the Kindle Unlimited, but there's a massive advantage there in that if you are exclusive, you just got one little upload and then it's done. You don't have to think, did I have it on Google Books, and did I have it on this and that? But yeah, the Create Space thing, as you say, is completely different, because then you have to format it as a paperback and you have to upload it and stuff like that. So I don't bother. The paperback I will update very occasionally if there's been a major change, but if there's a comma or something, I don't bother. Just let the paperback be slightly less than perfect. Don't really sell very many anyway. I mean, it's maybe 3, 4, 5 paperbacks a month. So that one person out there who's reading that one book can live with an extra comma or a missing comma or something. If I was selling hundreds, obviously it'd be a very different story, but then I'd have the money to pay for someone to just do it for me. So that's revising after the fact. The what I wanted to concentrate on was revising before the fact, before you've published. And I think that's broken down into two things. There's before you've written the book, and there's after you've written the book. And I've talked about on the podcast before about I hate editing. It's the worst part of writing for me. If I could, I would just write a first draft and then publish it, but it would be unreadable garbage, so I have to edit. And it's not a matter of hiring editors either. Even if I had loads of money and could hire 5 editors, their edits would not be my take on how the book should be. Like I want to get to the book to the point where the editing is just a matter of commas and spelling mistakes and stuff, not word choice and sentence structure, because that's my voice, my author voice. Like if you take that away, if you let an editor do it, it's not your book anymore.
Mm.
But the revision, I think I need to do more of, and I think has paid dividends in the past, is revising before you write anything. So revising the plan, as I mentioned earlier, like coming up with all the threads and the different plot points and all the different things that can happen. So I've done it two ways, which I've discussed before. One is outline the whole thing, but the end of the book tends to get a bit vague because I don't know what the character's going to want to do and all that kind of stuff. Or plan 20,000 words worth and then write 20,000 words worth and then plan 20,000 words worth and then write 20,000 words worth. Yeah. So they both have issues. Planning it all is very vague by the end, and writing it in spurts, it means you're kind of coming to a halt in order to plan the next bit. But then I don't know, I've had a lot of feedback from readers saying, oh my God, I never saw that coming. And the reason for that is because I get to 20,000 words or 40,000 words, and then I don't know what's going to happen next. So then I've talked about it before. I go through my process. I go, okay, what's boring and obvious? What could, what would be a stupid way to resolve this? And I go for long walks and think about it. And maybe a few days later I go, oh, I could do that. That would make sense. So yeah. So that's kind of a big advantage of that approach.
I suppose if you had your process down really tight, so you knew how long it would take you to do something, you could split your writing slots between actually writing and planning on. So instead of writing in bursts, you've got continuous writing with continuously planning just ahead of yourself. This thing, it's sort of what I'm doing with 7 Stones, because I've got my big, roughly know what's going on, and I plan ahead for what the little bit of arc is going to be. But I'll plan each episode a day or two before I write it. So I am cycling through on a very short time with each episode, actually adding the detail in, which has turned up some things that I really like that I probably wouldn't have thought of when I'd started out, or even if I'd gone, okay, well, I'll plan the next 10 episodes. So if you can get your process down, I don't know actually if trying to do that for a book would work for me, or if the process works for me because I'm also publishing a part a week. So I've got that very hard accountability to keep me planning, writing, editing, planning, writing, editing, planning, writing, editing, without slowing down on anything. So while I do take time to plan out the episodes, go for a walk and so on, I can't think, oh, I'm a bit stuck and let the planning drift over into another day, because I've got to get it written as well and get it edited. So I know the planning can't take too long, so I have to get back to the writing before it gets stale.
Yeah, I mean, we had on Green Star kind of a similar thing where we'd have a meeting every week, every weekend. And on season 1, we were kind of getting into the swing of things. And then by season 2, we would have a meeting. I would write the first draft that week, I forget, was it every second week, Dave, or was it every week? I think it was every second week in season 2.
I think it was a 2-week cycle for season 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
In season 3, we tried a 1-week cycle.
And I think season 2 kind of worked the best.
Mm.
I don't know what you think, but that in a way, again, it's going back to thinking time, because in season 3, we were planning it, and then I was writing it and planning it and writing, and there was no breathing time between the episodes for both of us to kind of think about it and think what would be best to come next. And the reason we did it was completely down to me, because I said, well, I can't write 2 things at the same time. So what I was trying to do was have a week of Green Star, and then in the other week I would write some of another book, and that wasn't working. So the ideal would probably be somewhere in the middle, but that doesn't really suit, where you would write for a week and then have a meeting 3 days after that or something, like half a week later, because then you've had downtime to kind of recover from writing quite fast, and then thinking about what's going to happen next and coming up with ideas, but not so much downtime that you're going, okay, I'm drawing my fingers now, I need to come up with something else I can do in the meantime. So yeah, I don't know. The Dragons and Magic is not episodic, so we haven't done that for a while now. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking about as well on what I'm writing next, is that there needs to be more revision before I write the first word. A lot of it as well, I think, is down to world building, which I did a lot of on Bitter End, not very much on the Hard Vacuum series. We did quite a bit on Green Star. The Shiny New Swindle series I had quite a lot as well. But everything else since then has been very little at all. And I think that's having a slightly negative effect on my writing as well. That the world building, probably 75 to 90% of it is wasted effort in the way that you're not going to use it. So for the Bitter End series, for instance, I came up with all the drugs that people took in the Bitter End world. I described what they were, where they came from, who used them, what the effects were, all that kind of stuff. No one ever did drugs in the entire series. So there was no reference to those drugs at all. However, there was plenty of things that kind of fleshed it out in my mind, I think. So it became more of a world in my mind, and that has an impact that I think I've been, I guess, lazy about doing, because you're going, but I can spend 2 weeks creating a world, or I can spend a day creating a world and then start writing. So I think, I need to do more of that as well, especially if I'm going to launch this new Sword and Sorcery series. I've been thinking about that this week as well, about how to kind of juggle all the different series, because it's kind of complicated. But yeah, revision beforehand, I think, probably has the most impact, because that's where you can change the structure entirely. Like changing once it's published, if you change a novel entirely, if you change Star Wars entirely, you get plenty of people complaining.
I think that there is a sweet spot for different things, because obviously revising and planning in advance has the greatest ability for you to come up with a change and run it all the way through without having to do massive amounts of changes because of knock-on effects. But on the other hand, it's always easiest to revise something that exists rather than create something from scratch. So I think there does come a point where it becomes more efficient to write your first draft just so you've got something to revise. So finding that sweet point where you've planned the world far enough away from where the plot's going to go that when the plot wavers a bit, because they always do, you don't end up drifting into an area you haven't planned in the world. But not planning the entire globe if you're never going to leave a small town.
Yeah, but if you're never going to leave the small town, you should know what the inn is called, or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing, is when you get to the writing, it's nice to not have to stop to go, okay, so I need to name the inn. What will I name the inn? And that completely destroys your flow, where if you already had it written down, it makes it a lot easier. And I think as well, it can point to points of interest by doing more work beforehand too. Because you'll create something in the world and then go, oh, I'd really like to explore that. So maybe you steer your characters towards it. So going back to a concrete example, I think with Sorcery, we did our whole planning sessions and that kind of thing. And I think if we had had some way of mapping it out a bit better, or maybe getting another perspective or something like that, perhaps we would have caught the issues earlier and avoided having to fix them afterwards. That's obviously very difficult because it's completely hypothetical, but I think there's a little bit of extra planning maybe, but as you say, it's about finding a balance. What you don't want to do is do thousands of hours of planning, because that's not going to help. Grant, the other thing, we haven't touched on so much is revision after beta reading, which we've been doing. Which I guess we can talk about our using our judgment to kind of work out what we think the problem is.
Yeah.
Because readers will say, okay, well, this, I'm confused by this, or this doesn't make sense, or something like that. And what that means is that the problem is not necessarily in that point in the story. It's that you haven't set it up beforehand. For instance, one thing that didn't strike us, but struck a few readers, was the whole statistics thing. So if you're not familiar, in our series, people have attributes, the actual point values on their attributes, which determines how strong they are or how smart they are, that kind of thing. And in Origin and Adventure, we explained how those things work. So if someone has 10 points in strength, then they can lift a house. If someone has 10 points in intelligence, then they can work out anything. But Sorcery is a different book. So we launched straight into it saying, oh, I don't have the stat for that. What's your stat? And stuff like that. And readers said, what are stats? I don't understand this stats thing. And these are people who had read the first two books, but they read them back in June. So it's been 4 or 5 months, and they've read a dozen books or more since then. And we didn't explain. We just expected, well, you've read the first two books, you should probably understand. But it's been a while for them. For us, it takes longer to write a book, so we've been working on it the whole time we understand how our own books work.
Well, Dan, it's one of those things that potentially I could take Sorcery give it to one of the people I role play with, and they'd read it through and they'd get it straight away because they're coming at it from that angle, but they might not get some of the other things. So it's getting that extra pair of eyes from someone who doesn't think the way you do, and then trying to run it backwards. And sometimes you do get something that you can't work out what it is quite that they're getting at. Where the sentence looks fine to you, and it is a linguistically valid sentence, and they flagged it as this sentence looks wrong to me. And you go, well, I could change the clause order to make a different linguistically valid sentence. So do I want to change? Is it just that the clauses aren't in the order that they'd want them to be? So is it a question of author voice, that my author voice and their hypothetical author voice are different enough that for this particular sentence, that's going to look wrong to them? And if I flip it round, it's going to look right to them, but it's going to be slightly, oh, that doesn't really sound like me. Or is it that there are two ways to do it, and one of them is very much more common than the other, and it doesn't strongly matter? So sometimes with revisions, you spend a certain amount of time sitting there going, well, there are two alternatives here. Which of them is actually more productive? Am I losing any of my author voice by going with one version over another? Am I suddenly making the book look more fluid, more unconsciously good to a lot of readers by doing one or the other? I mean, the classic example of this is American authors deciding to write in UK English. I know a lot of US authors sitting around constantly agonizing about whether they should start writing in British English, because otherwise they're losing the British market, and that they don't want to just confine themselves to the insularity of the United States. They want to open it up to the whole English-speaking market by writing in British English. Sorry, I got that the wrong way around.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I am joking. It's I'm pastiching the number of times that people go, "You've spelt humour wrong." No, I'm British. I'm British. My book is set in Britain. So
I mean, and I've seen we even on Dragons and Magic have a clear, better follow through rate to the next books in the UK than the US. Americans, as a sweeping generalization, have more of an issue with things not being written in their dialect than other people would do. So British people or Canadians or Australians or whoever would be more used to reading US English and going, yeah, but it's just written by an American, it's fine. Whereas Americans are used to things being edited to cater for them. Harry Potter, for example, rewritten in order to have humor be with OR instead of OUR. As I say, that's a sweeping generalization. There's plenty of Americans who don't mind reading British English, but in general, it seems like it's a point of national pride that there not be a U in humor, an extra U in humor, which is very strange to me, but never mind. Or a good example is aluminum in the opposite direction, where British and Irish people get very irritated and say aluminium, but aluminum is an American invention. So therefore, I think it should just be called aluminum, because if the Americans invented it and they want to call it aluminum, that's what the inventor wanted to call it. Why are we renaming it to aluminium?
Well, that's where context comes in. The product is aluminum because that's what was invented. The metal as a scientific thing is aluminium because that's what the periodic table says. So if you're doing chemistry, it's aluminium. If you're making a shed, it's aluminum. But that's too nuanced a generalization to be going through potentially, because then you find yourself caught in the, well, someone is making a pipe bomb in their shed. So they're adding powdered aluminium to other chemicals in an aluminum shed. And readers are then going to, all readers will then go, oh, it's a spelling mistake.
Anyway, it's kind of pedantic little things.
Yeah, we've gone off my original point, which was that sometimes the reasons for revisions or not revising clash. So if you're trying to capture Britishness because you're writing a cozy mystery set in Sussex, then you write in British English, probably. But then if you want to sell that book throughout the United States, the book will probably sell better and cause more people to read more of your books if it's written in US English. So you hit this, well, revise to emphasize the Britishness and revise to increase the marketability. And they're telling you to do different things. So I don't think there is a situation in which there are always going to be a list of revisions you can make to improve the book. There are only revisions you can make to tilt the book in one direction. So even if it's not the Star Wars thing of changing the plot, there are times, well, you can make a change that improves the feel of the book in terms of setting, or you can make a change that improves the feel of the book for a particular country. And it's not always going to be spelling, it can be stereotypes. Because I've had a couple of people read my short stories and say that they didn't get the time period the story was set in until 2/3 of the way through it, because there weren't any symbols of the time period prior to that, and they'd expect this, 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 and this. So, well, that's not how it actually is. So how people acted in, hypothetically, Sussex in the 18th century isn't necessarily how people who read 18th century setting books think they did. So you're going to get your history buffs who are annoyed at a thing, and your 18th century romance readers who are annoyed at the absence of more of that thing. It can.
Yeah, I mean, I had a discussion with Garrett Robinson, where we were talking about fantasy, but he was saying that fantasy should use thee and thou and that kind of thing. And I'm of the opposite opinion. I think it should be completely readable. Like, thou must go in to the storeth, and that kind of, not obviously Garrett's not writing anything like that, but what I'm saying is that it takes a little bit of learning or a little bit of adjustment for a reader to read something that's written in that way, in the archaic way. However, Garrett's point would be that it adds to the atmosphere of the story.
Yeah.
That it feels more like it's that time period. So it's not necessarily, I think it's down to your goal. If your goal is to sell millions of books, perhaps writing it in a more understandable way might sell more. Although Lord of the Rings is an example in the opposite. Does that have the thou and thee and stuff? I can't even remember.
I think so.
No, so
it's quite formal English, but it's
Yeah.
not archaic, I don't think. It's been a while since I actually read Lord of the Rings.
but
More turgid when you go through them. The Hobbit is very readable. Lord of the Rings is quite readable. The Silmarillion this is starting to feel a little academic, and then it gets. So I don't think Lord of the Rings is too archaic.
and then there's everything in between, obviously. Like, I've read plenty of fantasy novels. I think the general rule is that most people will change you and your to thee and thine or whatever, and not do anything else. So ignore all the other rules, just thee and thou and thine, which is enough that it doesn't get confusing, but it kind of gives some flavor of the atmosphere of the book that's being written. Anyway, I think we've kind of talked about every form of revision we can come up with.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to add at the end there, Dave? Buy Origin or download Origin? It's free.
Oh yes, get Origin. We're particularly if you are in Mexico, because it'd be quite nice to collect the set of all Amazon marketplaces.
As last time I checked, it's still doing really well.
It is. Origin's doing well. Adventure is doing quite well, particularly on the Kindle lending. It's doing much better than anything else I've got on Kindle lending. So that's
it's pushing me to, all the stuff I've had on Kindle Unlimited now in the last few months is pushing me to go, maybe I should take everything off Smashwords and Kobo, where I get 0 sales, essentially 1 or 2 sales every 3 months maybe. Where the unlimited stuff is giving me a few sales every couple of days, maybe at least.
Yeah, it's hard to judge. And once you've published a book, once a book's been published for a while, if you then put it into Kindle Unlimited, so on, it doesn't seem to pick up the way that books do if you do it straight away. So I think there is a difference between releasing only on Amazon and going to Amazon only.
Yeah, mostly what I'd be thinking of is that the Bitter End series is similar to Dragons and Magic.
Yeah.
So if I've got Kindle Unlimited readers on Dragons and Magic, and then they can go straight onto Bitter End, that makes it a fairly easy proposition.
True.
Anyway, so yeah, we should probably wrap up. We will see you all next week, and thank you for watching.
Right.